You may think 8 seconds isn't much. Well, it's not that much, but when you are recording in slow motion at 200 frames per second at a 25p base rate, that means it's 8 times more shots are accumulated. So when you play it back, that 8 seconds becomes 64 seconds. If you're shooting at 400 frames, it's twice that. And you shoot at 800 frames, well, you can work it out. In fact, when you look at these really high speed cameras like the Phantom Flexes, a lot of them actually only do maybe 2 seconds. In fact, the one that I shot, the shot which is at over 5,000 frames per second, the buffer was 1.2 seconds, which isn't much at all. That's why you need to get your timing right, and that's where end trigger really does help, because by the time you say action, you've almost lost your 1.2 seconds. This point and shoot only does 4 seconds. The previous generation only did 2 seconds, but you'd be amazed what you can get out of it if you get your timing right and make the right choice between start trigger and end trigger. Remember, end trigger is if you have no control of the situation, and start trigger is if you do and you can direct the motion and the shot. My favorite thing by far when shooting in the triggered mode is simply the fact you don't have all that data to go through. So at the end of the shoot day, you don't spend hours and hours offloading everything, which means I have more time to prepare for tomorrow, which is going to be a much more complex setup because we're going to be shooting indoors with fancy lights. This looks and sounds gross. And that's the point. This was shot using 2-second end trigger buffered mode in 250 and 500 frames per second. Sound is so important. You may have heard me say this in other episodes, but I can't stress it enough. All of these sounds are fake. All found online. None of them are actually sounds for what you are seeing. They're sounds which felt right for me or exaggerated what I was seeing on screen. I lit this incredibly strongly to get such a high shutter speed because, of course, when I'm shooting at 500 frames per second, I need enough light to have a shutter speed of 1,000th of a second, and that's a lot. This, though, was 1,000 frames per second, meaning a shutter speed of 2,000th of a second. And the way I got around this, because the quality is really quite poor, because there's no hard edges, you can totally get away with it. And the black background, there's no detail, because what happens in these high frame rate modes is they often degrade the image. You get patterns like moire, and you get nasty aliasing on edges. But if you can find natural things with nice curved edges and try and shoot in shallow depth of field, and to get rid of that noise, completely crush that background down. And in episode 8, where I talk about color grading in post, I show you just how much noise you can hide with some clever color grading. Without question, there is definitely a use for having an end trigger or start trigger at buffered mode, as well as a definite use for having continuous. Having both in a camera is ideal. And that end trigger mode is so important to get those moments which you have no control over, whether it's a lion yawning or a hippo coming out of the water or even just a seagull popping its head out from a dustbin. And speed ramping. Don't forget how important speed ramping is, otherwise the shots are just gonna go on forever.
Well, I own probably in the neighborhood of 25 guns, if I were just guessing. Some of them have belonged to my great-grandfather, and some of them have belonged to my father, my grandfather. And growing up with guns made me, you know, aware of the good and the bad that they can do.